Hello again, my little Volksgrenadiers, and welcome to another Warlord Wednesday, the episode of the week where we talk about all things bolt action. In this video, we shall be continuing our Beginner's Guide series, and this time, we're going to look at the main bad guys of World War II. It's time for the armies of Germany. Arguably, the Germans are the most important Axis faction of World War II, and as a result, it's not surprising that they're one of the most popular Axis factions on the bolt action tabletop. In fact, it's a pretty safe bet if you're thinking of getting into bolt action, but you're not going down the Allied route, you'll probably end up with the Germans, and this is further reinforced by the fact that they are super prevalent in many of the different starter sets, such as Gentleman's War and Band of Brothers. However, despite the fact they are intended as a beginner faction, they are still a major power, and as a result, they have a dizzying array of unit options and weapon variety. Therefore, they are the perfect faction for a classic Mordian Glory beginner's guide. The purpose of this video is not to be the ultimate handhold exercise through the entire faction. Rather, it's going to give you an overview of how the Germans feel and play in the game of bolt action. It's intended to help you understand if the Germans are the right army for you, and if so, what are some of the pros and cons of that faction. But with all that said, without further ado, let's Achtung Panzer, jawohl, my dear, and charge right into today's episode. So the first golden rule that I want to impress upon you about the Germans, the thing that really sums up the faction better than almost anything else, is their fantastic firepower. If the Japanese are the close combat army of the game, the Germans are definitely the shooty one. And this principle of Daka is baked into your faction from the ground up. One of your unique army rules is Hitler's Buzzsaw. This gives you an extra shot for each light machine gun and medium machine gun in your army. Now, this isn't just one extra shot per unit. This is one extra shot per gun. So if you have got a squad of veteran grenadiers and maybe you've got a couple of light machine guns in there, both of those light machine guns will get an extra bullet. And this can really scale up across your army, and you'll end up with getting quite a lot of additional firepower. Because whilst the Allies are running around with light machine guns with 4 shots, you're getting 5. That means that your light machine guns are actually equivalent to enemy Allied medium machine guns, because medium machine guns normally get 5 shots. But German medium machine guns get 6. And considering how many machine guns you can stack into your army, this really starts escalating, starts getting out of hand. You can have double LMG squads, as I mentioned, but also all of your tanks pretty much come guaranteed with 2 medium machine guns in them. So they're getting 12 shots just from their supplementary firepower. And when you start being able to take pintle machine guns as well, you can have German tanks that are rocking around with a big cannon and 3 machine guns. They're just spraying out all kinds of firepower, and they're backing up with some proper punch as well. And speaking of that punch, it's not just the extra MG shots, which are nice. It's also the fact that most German tanks tend to have a bigger gun than their weight class. What do I mean by this? Well, if you look at Allied vehicles, you tend to find that a light tank is equipped with a light anti-tank gun, and a medium tank is equipped with a medium anti-tank gun, and a heavy tank with a heavy anti-tank gun. Heavy, heavy, medium, medium, light, light. Germans go, no. We want to have a light tank with a medium machine gun. Thank you, Panzer III. We want to have a medium tank with a heavy anti-tank gun. Welcome to the Panzer IV. And we want a heavy tank with a super heavy anti-tank gun. Welcome to the Tiger I. However you slice it, the Germans always have upgunned vehicles, and this gives them a distinct advantage in tank-on-tank warfare because you've got extra range and you've got extra penetrative power as well. But wait, there's more, because it's not just about your bigger guns, like your machine guns, like your big tank guns. The Germans also get access to a whole plethora of high volume of fire small arms, assault weapons, things like your SMGs like your MP40, and your assault rifles like the STG-44. I'm not exaggerating when I say you can take every man in your army with an automatic weapon. And this is going to make your volume of fire shoot through the roof, diamond hands straight to the moon. And what's crazy is you don't need to wait to the late war, like many factions, to get your hands on all of these different weapons. You can get LMGs and MMGs right from the beginning. You get Panzer IIIs early on. And you also, amazingly, get assault rifles in the mid-war period. Because your Luftwaffe Fallschirmjäger can take FG-42 assault rifles. So the Germans, pretty much from the get-go, are going to have the best shooting on the battlefield. And all of this talk about war gear leads me on to my next point about the Germans, which is they get all of the cool stuff. Loads of unique weapon systems. You see, most factions can equip their standard infantry with rifles, maybe an SMG or two, typically one on the sergeant, and then an LMG as well. Sometimes veterans could take a bit more, sometimes inexperienced could take a bit less, but by and large, you're stuck with those three systems. Your LMG, your rifle, and your SMG. Germans are like, ha, no. I want to give my standard infantry, I want to give my inexperienced conscripts assault rifles, a weapon that no one else in the game gets, which has all the benefits of an assault weapon and a rifle rolled into one. I've got volume of fire and I've got range, and I can move and shoot without penalty. I can put that on the lowliest Volksgrenadier up to the highest veteran Panzergrenadier. Oh, whilst most other enemy infantry is struggling with tanks, they've got to rely upon their own tanks to help, or AT guns, Germans don't worry about that. Germans take Panzerfausts. So your infantry squad, your standard line grenadier unit, can have all the war gear it needs to take on any threat that it comes across. I know I'm kind of going on about this point a little bit, flogging a dead horse, over-egging the pudding, I get it, but I really want to hammer home how powerful and unique all of this extra war gear is. How I see it is it's kind of like you've got an extra bonus unofficial army rule in addition to things like your Hitler's Buzzsaw, your Blitzkrieg tactics, and your Tiger Fear. And speaking of tigers, the Germans have access to some of the best and coolest vehicles in the game. And there's a huge variety of them as well. Unlike the Americans, who are stuck with just endless iterations and variations of the same bloody Sherman tank, the Germans have got a Panzer for every occasion. Do you want a cheap, light machine gun tank that's just going to roll around blurting out bullets everywhere? Get yourself a Panzer 1 or a Panzer 2. Do you want something that's a bit more medium, something that can go toe-to-toe with enemy vehicles without breaking the bank? Get yourself a mid-war, late-war Panzer 3. You want to just start dominating those tank duels, leave no room for maneuver. Get yourself a Panzer 4, something with a proper heavy AT gun on it. Do you just want to turn up with an armored declaration of German might? Well then, let's start getting the Tiger or even the King Tiger out onto the battlefield. Whether you're going for a competitive meta list or one that is a bit more themed and narrative, you're going to find a tank that ties it all together perfectly. For example, you might be going to a cutthroat tournament, winner takes all, and you've got loads of veteran infantry and you just need some cheap Dakar tanks to back you up. That's fine. Panzer 1, Panzer 2, anything like that's going to have a great time. Or maybe you're doing a narrative event. Maybe you're recreating the last days of Berlin. And you're going to have a King Tiger supported by a whole bunch of inexperienced green troopers like Volkssturm. This is all contained within the same faction, and it's what makes Germans really popular, not just with the beginners, but also with the veterans. Because once you start collecting Germans, you can almost collect many armies within the army. And this brings me on to the fourth golden rule for the Germans, which is they can do any style of army you want. Unlike the British, who were mostly focused on regular and veteran troops and could kind of do hordes if they needed to at a push, the Germans truly can do any style, any type of army you want. Do you want to go for an early war force, which is all regular troops? They're well trained, but maybe they've not seen a huge amount of experience. You can do that. Do you want to have a hardcore Fallschirmjäger paratrooper army, all made up of veterans with the best gear? You can do that. Do you want to go for a late war army, which is filled to the brim with Osttruppen defending the Atlantic Wall, or Volksgrenadiers taking part in the Battle of the Bulge, inexperienced but well equipped? Or do you want to really get into the final last ditch, where you've got your men running around with rifles and Panzerfaust? That's basically it. You can do that. And it's not just the Wehrmacht as well. You've got all sorts of sub-factions you've got access to. For example, you could build a Luftwaffe Field Division, which consists of all the men that were combed out of the German Air Force and forced to fight on the front line. Or you could do something similar with the Kriegsmarine. Or you could go to the total other end of the spectrum, rather than focusing on those troops that were pulled out of one service and forced to fight in another where they weren't really very effective. You could go for a battle-hardened, dedicated and fanatical group of SS troopers, such as the SS Charlemagne. This was a unit that actually drove into Berlin in the final days of the war because they knew there was no going back for them, and they realized they'd rather fight to the death in the final days of the regime than surrender and get sent back to France. But let's move on to my fifth golden rule, which is the Germans were the main bad guys of the war. They started it and they were pretty much there till the final days of it. So you can play in any theatre and in all time periods. Do you want to recreate the fall of France, the invasion of Poland and Norway? You can do that. Early war, no problem. You can even engage in some of the fictitious or theoretical invasions that happened, such as Operation Sea Lion with the invasion of the British Isles. That's fine. Warlord Games has got rules for you to do that. Perhaps you want to get involved in the mid-war with the campaign in Africa with Rommel versus the Desert Rats. That's absolutely fine. More than doable. Loads of support. You've got Jewel in the Sun, all the different campaign books. Maybe you want to start looking at the Balkans with the fall of Yugoslavia and Greece. Yeah, not a problem. Alternative mid-war theatres there and lots of rules surrounding them. Or maybe you want to go to the Eastern Front, where the really horrible fighting was, where many argue the war was decided between the Red Army and the Germans. Well, they are very, very active there, to say the least. Whether it is the British, the Americans, the Soviets, or a whole host of other minor and medium powers, the Germans basically spent 6 years going around fighting everybody. Hell, if you really want to, you can even fight your own allies in the Italians. This might seem like a small point, but in my opinion, it's actually one of the most important things about the Germans and something that makes them super valuable and helpful to newer players. Because it's one less thing you need to worry about. You don't need to concern yourself if the gaming club that you're going to join focuses on mid-war or late war or early war. That's okay. Germans took part in the whole thing. You don't need to worry if you move town and go to a new club. Oh, is my army still going to be relevant? What if they only play late war here and I've got Italians? Or what if they only play mid and early war and I've only got Americans? Oh no, I won't be able to get involved as much as I want to. Well, that's just not a concern you have when you collect the Germans, and it just makes them super easy to pick up as a new player, and you can just kind of collect what you want, and you know that your faction is going to be relevant no matter what. Now, that covers a lot of the pros of collecting Germans in bolt action, but I do want to try and present a slightly balanced viewpoint, so I want to go through a couple of issues with the faction. Firstly, With great unit variety comes great power, but also can come a little bit of confusion. As a newer player, it can be difficult to know where to start with a faction like the Germans. So what I want to do is just point you in the right direction with a few box sets that I personally can vouch for. Firstly, you can go for the Gentleman's War box. This contains 2 small forces, one of British and one of Germans, and it's great for getting into the game with a friend. Both of those armies are equally balanced. They've both got an armoured car and 24 infantry. Brilliant. If you're not looking to get into the game with a friend, or you don't want a second faction, and you just want to focus on the Germans, the next box set I can recommend is the Desert Africa Corps, the DAC Starter Army. This is going to come with loads of German infantry, but it's also going to come with a Panzer III, which is a very solid tank throughout the war, and also the infamous Flak 88. It's probably the most popular starter army for the Germans. It's one that most people pick up or are recommended to pick up because you get everything you need for a standard 1,000-point game, and it's also one of the cheapest ones that Warlord makes. And you can get it for about £70 if you go to a decent third-party retailer with a 10-15% discount. However, it does cut a few corners. It has just enough infantry, but you may find that you want to add an extra box in there once you've built them, so you've got a few different weapon varieties. On top of that, it's also a mid-war box set, so you're going to miss out on things like your Panzerfaust and your STGs. And as we mentioned, they're pretty good. So it's a good box set, but it's more of one that you dip your toe in, you try out the game, and then if you want to expand, you do so. If you had to twist my arm and pick one German starter box set, which I think is the best out of all of them, I would recommend the German Grenadier one. It comes with a crap load of infantry, and it comes with a tank and an armoured car, loads of support teams as well. It really is the complete package, but it is the most expensive one that I'm recommending here at over £100. But again, get this from a third-party retailer and you might be able to get it with a pretty decent discount. And the last point I want to make is, we've talked a lot about all the cool gear and weapons and tanks and units that the Germans can get. And it's true, they get all of these things. But they're not free. Your stuff is the best, but if you start loading up on war gear, your units are going to get expensive in-game points very quickly. And you might start finding yourself outnumbered, even by forces consisting of just regular troops, not even conscript blobs. One of the most common mistakes I see new German players make is them taking their standard squad and they load it up with every single bit of gun and gear they can get their hands on. And they end up paying through the nose, if not twice as much as their opponent, for what essentially amounts to an infantry squad. And yeah, it's got some good stuff in it, but it's still 10 blokes at the end of the day. And those 10 blokes could get pinned down. They could get blown up by artillery. And if you over-invest in a unit, you're going to find yourself struggling in other areas of the game. You may find that you don't have as many dice in the dice bag, so you're constantly getting out-activated by your opponent. That means you're getting pins constantly stacked on top of you. You might not have enough combat width to play for all of the objectives, and therefore, whilst you've got 2 objectives completely locked down under your control, your opponent is controlling the other 3. You lose the game. The point I'm trying to make here is, if you're getting into Germans for the first time, there is a fine balancing act. And this is something you're going to have to learn early on how much gear you take, because it's tempted to take all of it, and how many guys and how many boots you put on the ground. Well, at least that's been the case in my experience. Of course, all of this is just like my opinion, man. Let me know what you think down in the comment section below. Are there any other golden rules that you think new bolt action players should be aware of? If you've enjoyed today's video, don't forget to smash that like button like the Maginot Line, and also subscribe to never miss an episode. And if you found today's video particularly helpful, then please consider becoming a channel member or Patreon. By supporting the channel, you will be directly helping me create more bolt action content. On top of this, you will be unlocking a whole host of perks for yourself as well, including access to the Mordian Glory Discord server, where we have an active and growing bolt action community. In fact, I'd just like to take a moment to say a big thank you to all of the latest channel members. Thank you to War Tactics, William Holmes, Ronnie, Philip McCary, Fraggle, Adlaw, Tanro93, Adam B, Manny P, Wizzo55, Flowrider, Tyler James, Alejandro, Honest Man Dave, Mr. Kaiserman, Used Car Jockey, Clyde Tarkus, None of Your Business, Paul B, Enclave Vet, The Doom Melon, Boomber PMAK, Anne Krung, D King, The Bloody Talker, Peaches the Destroyer, Sangao, Trey Tora, Michael F, Caleb Watson, Carpathian, and Scott Collins. Thank you guys for doing your part. I also want to do a shout out to the latest Patreon supporters as well. So a huge thank you to Mrs. Rogue Merc, Raphael the Third Angel, Maximus, Dixon the Third, Ronnie Dodd, Nick Ellingham, Pink Guard, James Kiddy, Apollo Stratus, Meg Sumner, The Dark Warfare, Benjamin Hilker, Charles Hartman, and the Elder Kine. And last, but certainly not least, I want to say a personal thank you to all of my top tier Patreon supporters. These are the War Masters, the people who have truly gone above and beyond the call of duty. So a massive thank you to Alan Blunt III, Bon Bon Vert, Mark Panconi, Ross Miller, Swordfish Trombone, John Stubbs, Diesel Fox, and August Varney. Thank you guys. Your ongoing and incredible support makes a huge difference, and it is a big part of how I'm able to do Mordian Glory full time. I hope you've all enjoyed today's video. Thank you for watching, and of course, as always, I'll see you guys next time.